His is a famous name, but this Cassius Clay was not a boxer. He was a politician, a man who fought his battles not for belts and titles, but for the hearts and minds of the people in the war to save a nation. Cassius Marcellus Clay was born in 1810 to Revolutionary War veteran Green Clay and his wife Sally Clay. He was born in Claremont, the Clay's plantation home in Madison County, Kentucky. Claremont, which came to be known as White Hall, was also the site of Cassius Clay's death in 1903. He was born there, died there, and some reports indicate that this important American figure haunts the place still. When young Cassius Clay attended Yale, he quickly learned that he was quite different from the other Southerners there. Southerners had been attracted to the Ivy League school since Southern idol John C. Calhoun had graduated from the institution in 1804. A society of Southerners, founded in 1819, fought against what they perceived to be the negative influence of the industrial North upon the agrarian South. They fought for the preservation of the plantation culture and everything that went with it, including slavery. Despite hailing from a slaveholding family and state, Clay resisted the rhetoric and found himself drawn instead to the powerful oratory of William Lord Garrison, a prominent abolitionist. It became clear to the young Clay that slavery needed to be eliminated, but not at the cost of the Union. Clay, like his cousin, the influential Senator Henry Clay, was an emancipationist, fighting for slavery's end through legal and peaceful means. He left school buoyed with optimism and for the future. He married Mary Jane Wakefield shortly after the graduation and began to speak out openly against slavery. Clay's ideas threatened an entire way of life, and people did not oppose his ideas, although he was adamant that violence did not be used to end slavery. His opponents were not nearly as accommodating. In 1843, Samuel Brown hired an assassin, shot Clay in the chest. Clay responded with his Bowie knife, slicing the ear, nose, and cheek of his attacker. Brown's bullet had found its mark, but had been stopped by the scabbard Clay always wore across his chest. Clay escaped without injury. In 1849, a mob attacked Clay, and while he struggled for his life, he was disarmed. When order was restored, Clay lay unconscious. His breastbone was severed and had been stabbed in the lung. He survived, but needed months to recover fully. After his recovery, Clay was speaking in public again, this time on behalf of his cousin, Henry, who was hoping to gain the Whig Party's presidential nomination. But when the latter sent a missive to Cassius Clay asking him to relax his rhetoric so as not to offend the Southern Whigs, the letter was intercepted by abolitionists in the North. It was trumpeted in the press as evidence of Henry Clay's Southern sympathies. He lost the nomination. Cassius Clay continued to promote his views, establishing the True American in Lexington in 1845. Death threats were common, and it is said that in his newspaper offices he kept a pair of Cassius Clay continued to promote his views, establishing the True American in Lexington in 1845. Death threats were common, and it is said that in his newspaper offices he kept a pair of loaded cannons, their muzzles pointed towards the front door, ready to unleash their fearsome brand of deterrence at anyone who dared threaten the newspaper's operations. Despite these precautions, Clay Lexington's offices were overrun, the machinery disassembled and sent north to Cincinnati. Resistance there forced Clay to move his operations once again, this time to Louisville, where he changed the paper's name to the Examiner. He worked tirelessly, donating land and money to create a school for non-slaveholders in Kentucky, forming the foundations of what is now Berea College. Speaking tours took him through the North. In 1854, he stopped in Springfield, Illinois, where he met a lawyer named Abraham Lincoln. When Lincoln announced his intentions to run for the Republican Party's presidential nominations, Clay threw his support behind him. When Lincoln ascended to the presidency and began working on the Emancipation Proclamation, he consulted his old friend for advice. Lincoln feared that the proclamation might alienate Kentucky. Clay assured Lincoln that Kentucky had long ago made its stand and the proclamation would do little to alter allegiances. Weeks later, Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, an act in which Clay had played no small role. He considered the moment the crowning glory of a life spent fighting for those who had been denied a voice. In his later years, Clay became more and more withdrawn. Suspicion toward Republican radicalisms during Reconstruction led a split with the party he had helped create. The resulting disillusionment led him to the Democrats. When his health began to deteriorate, Clay retreated to Claremont, his family's home. Green Clay had built Claremont in 1799, a Georgian style brick home with 7 rooms. When Green Clay died, the home was passed on to his son. Cassius put his own personal stamp on the place in 1860 when architects Thomas Lewinsky and John McMurtry oversaw Claremont's renovation and expansion. Whitehall, as the home is now known, was enlarged to 44 rooms, and ceilings were extended to 16 feet. There is a sweeping staircase running 30 steps, each almost 50 inches wide. The home incorporated technological advances rare for its time, a central heating system, and an indoor bathroom. At the age of 83, Clay remarried, inciting public outrage when people found that he had taken as his wife the 15-year-old daughter of a local farmer, Dora Richardson. Clay has ever remained defiant, challenging those who objected to take her from him. Unfortunately for Clay, Richardson left him after only a year of marriage. Clay died alone in Whitehall in the older section of the home of kidney failure on July 22nd, 1903. He was buried in Richmond Cemetery, a grand Victorian monument marking his final resting place. Whitehall was passed down through various generations until it was purchased by the state in 1967 at the urging of the governor, Louis B. Nunn. Restored to its original splendor, the home is now a Kentucky historic site, paying tribute to one of the state's most colorful political figures and suspected ghosts. Tourists and Kentuckians go to Whitehall every Halloween to see Cassius Clay's life reenacted, as students from eastern Kentucky act out episodes from Clay's life in what had become called ghost walks. Of course, most do not expect the spirit of Clay himself to make an appearance, although he sometimes does. A student writing about her experience in Lina Lynn's Kentucky home and ghost stories website volunteered at Whitehall for 4 years. Like others, she had heard the stories about Whitehall being haunted, but never lent much credence to the accounts. Ghosts and the paranormal, she thought, were the stuff of fiction, but there was before her volunteer work at the site began. During her first year there, the student was scheduled to perform in one of the home's outdoor kitchens. But when she went there, she found the door locked, and she did not have a key. She turned her back to the door and called out to the nearby director to unlock the door. When she turned back, she gasped. The door was wide open, having been opened by invisible hands. It brought tears to my eyes, the student wrote. Her experiences did not end there. That same year, as she was changing in a third-floor room, she noticed flickering candlelight illuminating the dark recesses of the ceiling. Of course, there was no candle in the room. 2 years later, the student was in a second-floor room and saw a shadow moving across the floor. She turned to say hello to whoever was passing behind her, but found herself staring at an empty room. While Clay died almost a century ago, it's rumored that he never left the home where he spent so many years and where his life both began and ended. Sightings and reports for over the years described Clay's ghost pacing back and forth through Whitehall's windows. People claim he waits there, hoping that someday his ex-wife will return. In the meantime, he is a gracious host, entertaining and assisting the people who continue to visit his house.